the next one that I was going to talk about was how as you just said, at the end of 2024, you said 2025 was going to be the year of agentic AI. In that same conversation, you also predicted new jobs like software composer, AI interpreter, and thermal plumber.
Thermal plumber, yes, exactly. Yeah, this is a fun but necessary experiment you have to do. And we all, any of us in the industry, anybody in a leadership position, the number one source of angst in AI in general is this general fear of displacement of humans, that we are going to, I don't know, shift a bunch of jobs to machines. We're going to change and on a very personal level, if you're a human being involved in this world right now and you're seeing things like agentic and generative AI systems and all of the things that we're talking about here, which are very exciting and very real, you kind of contextualize it to yourself saying, does this impact me? Could I potentially not have a job? Will my job change? Will my company exist? Will my world get changed? There's a cartoon I love that somebody sent me a million years ago. It's a professor in a classroom, and he asks the question, who in this room likes change? And every hand goes up. And then he says, who in this room wants to change? And no hands go up. We're kind of opposed to changing ourselves. We might like change, but as long as it doesn't impact us. When you start thinking about AI, you start to realize very quickly that change is inevitable. That like every big technology inflection, you don't want to be the last farrier when the internal combustion engine came out. There's a really important need to understand that. The problem is it's happening really fast. And so I don't think we collectively are spending enough time in, I'll call them deeply intellectual conversations about really thinking about what the real jobs are. We can talk at high levels and say, oh, every technology has always created jobs. That's true. Data shows that, probably going to happen this time. But if you're a person who has a job and you think your job's going to go away and nobody's told you what the future jobs are, that's a very awkward situation. So I actually took some time at that, last year, and we started to think. I actually have a much longer list, but we picked out a few and put them in that blog to say, okay, if you really start working with this stuff, you realize that the human's role does change. But there's a whole bunch of new jobs that need to exist for this thing to work because of the technology inflection. And so the ones you mentioned are good examples. Like imagine a world where all the software writes itself. Well, kind of a problem there because the act of writing software only happens once you know what program you're trying to create, what problem you're trying to solve. It also requires judgment about there are many different ways to build a software program. And it depends on how you're going to use it. Do you create microservices or monolithic software? Is it got to be cloud native or not? Is it 12-factor or not? These are decisions that an AI by themselves can't really make. And so we started to say one of the roles that will absolutely exist for a very long time is some human being has to be the composer of the software. They don't actually play the musical instrument, but they decide what this system should be, what is good, because without that, you can't even give a prompt to an AI. It doesn't know what to do until you tell it. And if you just tell it write software, that's not good enough. And if you tell it to solve my sales problem, it won't know what to do. And so you're playing this role of composition, of leader, of decision maker. And so I was just talking to some universities again about this. And I said, I need you to produce people that might have some code proficiency. Hopefully they know how to use coding assistants, but I really need them to understand good software architecture and how to build a system and what it needs to look like without necessarily having to write the code themselves, because that's the skill you're going to need. Second one that we talked about was thermal plumbers, which is it sounds great. It gets people thinking, but it turns out the skill set necessary to make a GPU cluster work are this composition of skills that don't typically intersect. Like, to be technical, I need someone who understands computer hardware engineering and thermodynamics. Now, I'm an electrical engineer with a computer engineering option. I know a lot about computer architecture. I only know something about thermodynamics because it was an optional elective that I happened to have taken. Nobody taught me about, fluid dynamics to be an electrical engineer, but it turns out if you want to make a GPU cluster work, it's direct liquid cooling, and you have to understand the intricacies of how thermodynamics and fluid dynamics work, and you have to understand how GPUs work. And what you're really doing is managing this thermal envelope, the place where the GPU runs its best without collapsing and without being inefficient. That is a very specialized skill, but if you look at the kind of academic disciplines necessary to achieve it, they don't really usually intersect. One's a mechanical engineering problem, one's an electrical engineering problem. Well, this is a both problem. And so, there aren't going to be a lot of thermal plumbers, but without them, we're not going to be able to run these clusters. And so you're already seeing that job form inside of the big clusters because it's a super important piece of this future architecture. And then the third one, which I really like, because those first two are pretty specialized. You got to be like a really good, thoughtful computer science person or a really, really smart engineer. The one in the middle is the fascinating one, which is what we call an AI explainer. And it basically says, look, we are going to more and more produce data and insights using AIs. And that's great. We should do that. But the way we deliver it to humanity is equally important. And so we already have some examples today in things like genomics, where you have this, technology mining through your genome and discovering that you have certain attributes, some of them good, some of them less good. And so what you find in most cases, if you have a marker for, a whole bunch of really bad things, like, let's say it comes back and you are likely to have Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and something else bad, it would be unconscionable to send an email to you. It needs a human being to empathetically explain that to you and to make sure that you understand what to do with it. And the person that's doing that is not just a technologist. They're not even the clinician. They need to understand the data set. They need to understand how the AI came to that conclusion, but they also need to empathetically explain it to you. Now, that's a very specific example that's already happening, but take it into any number of other examples where, you're doing a performance review. Okay, I have seen, and we are going to build and use technology that automates that entire process. Should the performance review be an email or a portal or a text or a chat bot, or should it be the manager having a conversation with you? So you have become an AI explainer, but you're explaining not just your opinion, you're explaining what the data told us in a way that a human being could understand. Even in, academia, I would give an example this morning of, when you have a performance issue, let's say there's a student the data is showing they are going to fail out. They are not doing well. Funny enough, we have tools that are going to emerge that will tell us how to fix that we can actually get them back on track. Do we just send them a bunch of emails and hope they figure it out? Or do we have a responsibility to put a human being right in the middle of that can translate what the information is and what the plan is and connect that human being back into the right track? And so everywhere that you have machine-generated data, sometimes it's benign and you can just deliver it and it's great, but there are more and more places as we use this in medical, in performance management, even in social services, where the need for the interface is still humanity because we're dealing with humans, but the skill we need is not just someone who can talk to a human, it's someone who can bridge that gap. So they have to have a kind of new literacy about why the technology did what it did, what it's telling you. I think that's an enormous job. I think that's going to be, if you wonder what's the call center of the future, it's that. It's a much more maybe sophisticated job, but it's one that it biases not towards the technical skills of humanity, but towards the other skills in humanity. It's the BA path, where the other ones were the PhD engineering path. And so we just went through that exercise, and honestly, we found like a dozen of them that were very interesting, and they all seemed very reasonable. And we're actually seeing them happen within our own company, that these jobs are starting to form organically. I think we owe it to ourself, our population, society, because this is moving so fast, to spend quality time as we deploy these technologies, looking for what happens to humanity, what jobs emerge. When I go through this narrative with a lot of people, they get a lot more comfortable. They feel like, this isn't net zero, that I'm just going to wipe out humanity and there will be no jobs. Yes, things will change, but there will be new jobs that are created and new jobs that are impacted. By the way, the one thing I will give you as a caveat on that is, ignore everything I just said. The single biggest job creation of the AI cycle is actually construction. It's construction workers, plumbers, electricians. The amount of infrastructure that is being built and will be built to power this AI transformation is bigger than the infrastructure bill that was passed in the United States several years ago. It is a gigantic public works project, but it's run by the private sector, and it's going to employ a lot of people, and it's going to do that for a very long time. So there is definitely a job creation angle, but there is also, unfortunately, a very fast-moving disruption happening. And so we're going to have to be really thoughtful about what the future jobs are and help people get there, because this does change who does work and how work is done, especially as we move into things like agentic.